Let us pray. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So, we had some readings about eating meat, sacrificed to idols, and demons being cast down. Sometimes it's difficult to enter back into these texts that were written thousands of years ago, but we're going to jump in today. And as I was wrestling with these texts this week, I sat at my desk, and from where I sit at my desk, I can see this hanging up on the wall across from me. And it's, I think, a really interesting depiction, right, of the Last Supper. It was made by a Lutheran pastor who lives in, I believe, Pennsylvania. And as with every gift, there's a story. The story is this. When I was a vicar, Vicar Brett, I was at a church full-time for a year in training to be a pastor. I was 25, and I did a lot of work with the youth, and you know I still love working with youth. I stay involved in our youth ministry still. I think it's very important. But that was most of my job as a vicar, and I worked with some other adults, and there was this young lady, beautiful young lady, who looked like a teenager herself. She was really thin and blonde, beautiful young lady, and she had 3 little kids, 2, 4, and 6, and she was one of the youth's favorite youth workers. So I was the same age as she was, 25, and it was this time of year, and I was hugely pregnant with my first child. And one day I got a call from her, and she did not sound good. And she said, "Please, can you come over right away?" So I did. She lived in an apartment complex, and when I walked in, I noticed it was a disaster. I mean, it was a mess, but I'm thinking, well, she has 3 little kids, you know. She looked a mess. Her eyes were red from crying, her face was splotchy, she just looked like she was at her wit's end. And she said to me, "Okay, I'm just going to pour it all out." She said, "I have a cocaine addiction." She said, "And it is so out of control that even though our family has no money, I was $10,000 in debt to feed my addiction. So I had to fess up to my husband about my problem, and we didn't know where to get the money. The drug dealer who lives in this apartment complex was threatening my life if I didn't pay up. So my husband went to his parents, the Lutheran pastor, and his wife, the pastor who made this gift. She said, we went to his parents, and they paid our debt, $10,000. And then she just sobbed. She said, "But what my husband doesn't know is that I'm right back where I was." She owed 10 more thousand. Where was it to come from? The drug dealer was threatening her again. She looked at me, and her face was like ravaged, and she said, "I feel as though I have a demon. Cast it out, please." And I said to Brett, "You've had to deal with a lot in these first 6 months of your internship. I don't think anyone's asked you to cast out demons." Okay?
But I'm available.
I felt, so inadequate to the task. But I saw her pain, and in my compassion, which means suffering with, I was feeling her pain, and so I just gave it up to God and said, God, I hand it over to you, and I laid hands on her for about a half hour. We sobbed, we cried, I prayed for God to fill her and give her the strength and cast out this demon. I prayed in Jesus' name. I prayed for the power of the Holy Spirit to fill her and cast this out. And at the end, we were exhausted. And then we talked. Okay, now you have to share this with your husband. And we got her into a 3-month rehab. And we got word out to the drug dealer that this was done. And I had a meeting, which never happened, thanks be to God, to meet the drug dealer to say, that's it. But I truthfully was afraid. When you're pregnant, you're thinking of this life within you, and I don't want to put this at risk. Who knows what this guy could do? And he never showed up, thanks be to God. But, and she went to rehab. We had fundraisers. We paid the debt. Kids in the youth group, I had a meeting of youth and parents. I just put it all out there. We put together teams. We went in, we cleaned the apartment. We made meals. The youth babysat the kids. And for 3 months, we just did what needed to be done. Our readings for today challenge us to look inside and say, what are my unclean spirits? What are my demons that need to be cast out? Addictions are huge. Even in a community like ours, I have seen people in the grip of addictions. But sometimes it's something else, Sometimes it's an inability to let go of something from your past, some hurt, some wound, some resentment, some grudge, some anger that you just will not let go of. I have someone very close to me. I used to be very close. And this person is so filled with anger that I see it destroying all of her relationships, and I see it destroying her. I see it destroying her health. She was a beautiful woman, and she just looks worn out. Anger is exhausting. It is, but she won't let herself, get out of its grip. Another young woman I think of, who saw me for spiritual direction years ago. A beautiful young woman. I'm sorry these stories are all about women, that's just the way it went. But she was so in the grip of fear. This woman who saw me for spiritual direction, she desired to travel and to go to this conference and to learn new things and to do this and never did any of it. Because she was so crippled by fear. She had desires of what she wanted to, be when she grew up, a young woman. But she never took any of the steps. So crippled with fear. So, she lived this small life because of that fear. There was a Lutheran theologian named Timothy Lull. And he taught at one of our Lutheran seminaries in California, Pacific Lutheran Seminary. And he died tragically young. But before he died, I was blessed to go to a conference and hear him speak. And he said, in our contemporary society, one of the best examples he knows of church is 12-step program. Al-Anon, etc. 12-step programs. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to any, but I have, and the first step is that you admit that you are powerless over your addiction and cannot help yourself. And the second step is that you acknowledge that there is one, used to say God, and now it says higher power, that there is a God, there is a higher power who does have power over your addiction and over everything else, and that's what you turn to, right, to help you overcome this. That's the only thing strong enough to help any of us, right, with our own demons. We need something a lot bigger than we are. I couldn't have cast out that addiction from that young woman, but God can, right? And even the story about Jesus where they say, oh, he teaches with this authority, not like others. The word in Greek for authority is this word exousia, and ousia is the verb to be, being. But ex is where we get, we studied the book of Exodus. It means exit, it means way out, it means something outside of our own being. Authority in the Bible means something bigger than we are, okay? Authority means that we don't rely on our own power, we rely on God's power. And that's in the first lesson about true or false prophets. It says that the true prophets are the ones who don't rely on their own power, but who are filled with God's power. And that's the power that filled Jesus. And that's the power that cast out that young woman's demon. And that's the power that can cast out whatever unclean spirits or demons we are battling with in our own lives. If you noticed, there's also the importance of the community, right? If it had not been for that whole community pitching in and making meals and cleaning out closets and taking care of those kids and raising those funds and doing all that needed to be done, that woman would never have had a chance. Jesus, right? Jesus surrounded himself with community. And another Lutheran theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said when Jesus instituted the sacrament, he also instituted the community for us. Because at his Last Supper, right, he wanted to give us food for the journey, but he wanted to remind us that the journey is not one we can ever make alone. We have to do it together. When Jesus said, do this for the remembrance of me, the Greek verb means continue on a regular basis to do this in remembrance of me. We need to continue to get together to strengthen one another, to challenge one another, to be God-made flesh in one another. Christianity is not a solo sport. Tom Brady's great, but he needs the rest of the team, And that's what Christianity is, right? We need each other. And that young woman needed each other. And St. Paul says the community is so important. That weird text about don't eat meat offered to idols. See, in this community in Corinth, you had two groups of people. You had people who thought they were so mature and wise and had all this knowledge. And he says knowledge is great, but love is what builds up a community. Knowledge puffs us up and makes us think we're so great. Love is what it's really about. And what was happening is new Christians were confused because they saw these mature Christians eating this meat that had been sacrificed to idols, and they were like, oh, should we be doing that as Christians? And Paul says, we know that idols don't exist, and your conscience might be mature enough to not be bothered by this. But if anything you do in the Christian community harms someone else, harms a weaker brother or sister, then you need to be big enough to sacrifice for the sake of your weaker brother or sister. Okay? If you don't have an alcohol problem, and you go to a party and you're beside someone who's struggling with it, have a Diet Coke. You know, don't weaken the conscience of your brother or sister. Everything we do, Paul says, should be for the sake of the community. Final thought from today's text is, when we hand it over to God and we let God cast out our demons, we can't leave ourselves empty. You know, there's this famous parable where Jesus says a man had a demon in his house, and the house represents us, and he cast it out, and what happened? 7 more came and filled the house because the guy left the house empty. So let me tell you, when I deal with people who are struggling with addictions, for example, I say, okay, yeah, it's great that you got rid of drinking, but now, you know, don't turn to food or cigarettes or some other addiction to replace that. You need to fill your house with that which is much bigger than we are, because that's the only thing big enough to fill that space in us. So sisters and brothers, whatever your unclean spirits, whatever your demons, today the texts invite us to hand it over to the one who is much bigger than we are, who has the power to cast out and make new. And incidentally, that young woman, I heard from her about 7 years ago. I hadn't heard from her in maybe 15 years. Today, she is working in a drug and alcohol rehab center for teens. God can take the worst of us, right, and transform it into something